Buying a home used to feel like the natural next step in the game of life, but lately it feels like an endurance test, and we're all trying to figure out how do we keep up. With home prices that are still climbing and mortgage rates going through the stratosphere, the question this week is very simple. Does our income actually stand a fighting chance against today's housing cost? Because based on that recent report that I saw that came out from Realtor.com that I'll be breaking down this week, it doesn't look like many of us are sticking to the 30% affordability rule. And if we can't stick to that rule, what is the long-term outlook for the housing market? Is there any real solution, like I've asked before? Or are we just waiting to see this thing pop like 2008? So let's get into it. And we'll be back in 3, 2, 1, we gone. Welcome back, family, to another episode of the First Sip Podcast. I'm your host, Dekimbe Smith, and this week we are sipping on some water because it is hot. If you guys are up here in the Northeast this week, it has been hot. I'm talking 100-degree weather day after day after day, and we still haven't caught a break. So before I pass out on this episode, I'm gonna be hydrating a lot, sipping my water. You guys make sure you're doing the same if you're up here in this area, because we cannot afford to be falling out, okay? So stay hydrated and stick with me as we get into this new report. Now, Realtor.com came out with a report that basically shows that a lot of us can't afford to buy homes in many parts of the country. It says that the typical family would need about 45% of their income to afford a median priced home, assuming that's around $440,000, $450,000, right, for that priced home. Now, how did they come to this conclusion? Now, they considered a few different factors, right? They assumed the mortgage rate of about 6.82%, which is where it's been for about the past month, hasn't really budged, a down payment of about 20%, and also factoring in tax and insurance payments of about 1.72% for the home's price annually. Right now, when you're looking at these things, that's how they came to that conclusion, once again, that most families would need about 45% of their income, or else you're not going to be able to afford this. Now, I know we've talked about this before, and you may know that you can get into a home with less than 20%. But once again, if you're looking to avoid things like PMI and you want to start off with some good equity in the home, then the rule of thumb is always going to be put down 20%, right? But of course, many people don't do that. Most people are putting down less than 5% on a home, 3%, when we're talking about FHA loans and those kind of things. But going off of this report, that's the metric that they're using, and this is what we're looking at. So when you start looking at some of the most expensive parts of the country, what does that look like? And when I was looking at that, this is when it started to get crazy, because you look at a place like Los Angeles, right? You take the median income of people who are living out there and what the actual, annual mortgage payments, the taxes, the insurance, all those payments add up to. And for people in LA, they would need more than their annual income to actually be able to afford a home. If you're in LA and you're making about $91,000 a year, your annual mortgage payment, tax, and insurance is still going to add up to about $95,000 a year, right? So that takes up about 105% of your total income. When you're looking at that, you have to ask yourself and say, okay, how is that even possible? It's not, right? Real quick and simple, it's not possible. Most people in LA rent, right? They have less than, I think it's like a 40% homeownership rate. When you compare that to the rest of the country that has a 64% ownership rate, it just shows you that it's not possible, right? And then you look at the next two on the list there, they also fall in California. So California clearly has its own affordability issues that make them stand out far and above all the others. But then you got New York, right over here in the Northeast, that comes right underneath that. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you see New York just voted for a new mayor who has a lot of plans to address housing over there, right? And we're talking about New York City. Now, in New York City, housing affordability is one of the biggest issues, and it's very clear. You're either somebody who can really afford it, or you're somebody who's struggling to get by. And most of New York City is made up of, average workers, people who are, blue collar, white collar workers who are just trying to live a normal day-to-day life, right? Not everybody is a Wall Street bro or a real estate mogul who is making millions of dollars a year who can afford that lifestyle. So when we're looking at these markets, clearly they do skew the numbers because they are just so unrealistic and unaffordable for many of the people who already live there. So let's look at some of the more affordable markets in the country. When I was looking at the chart that showed the least expensive areas in the country, right? Number one stood out was right here in Pennsylvania with Pittsburgh. Now, if you're looking at Pittsburgh and you're earning about $72,000 a year, you see that your annual mortgage payment, tax, and insurance only comes up to about $19,000 a year, right? Let's say 20,000, just round it up. And what does that look like for your share of income? That's about 27.4% of your income. Looking at that, right, like I talked about before, if you're sticking to that 30% affordability rule, that right there clearly fits it and still gives you a little bit of room on top of that, right? Going down to the next one, you have Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, and then Indianapolis, all falling right around that 30% rule, right? Indianapolis, as you can see, goes up a little bit, right around 33%. But once again, that's still not crazy. Like when we're comparing it to things like the last numbers where we said LA was 104% of your income. You have San Diego, 77%. After paying those things, what are you actually left with Nothing. You're going to be eating beans and rice for the rest of the year, but at least you got a nice home. I don't think that's how many of us want to live. So that's why we always have to look around and see, okay, what do our options look like? Are there other affordable places that we can move to in the country? And that's something that California definitely dealt with over the last couple of years, between changes with their tax laws and how they're planning on taxing higher price homes. People are looking around and saying, okay, are there other options out there? Should I be moving to other places? And they definitely are, right? They're not sitting around and just waiting for something to change. Nope, those people are hopping up and going. Same thing is happening in New York. A lot of people during the pandemic left New York, left New Jersey, and they moved to places like here in Philadelphia. Why is that? Oh, I'm happy you asked, because I actually pulled up the numbers for Philadelphia. So let's look at that. Okay, so when we're looking at Philadelphia, we see that the median price home right now in 2025 is right around $385,000. And when you're looking at the monthly mortgage payment, that balances out to about let's say $2,600, right? Just to round it up. The median income for somebody living here in Philadelphia is about $88,000 a year, which means you'd be spending about 34% of your income on housing costs, which once again isn't crazy. And this is something I talk about with people here in Philadelphia a lot, because I know sometimes we see the mortgage rates, we see numbers about home prices going up through the roof, but we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what's actually going on in our local area? And is it still crazy? Now, of course, I know there are going to be some people who say like, oh, well, that median income doesn't really represent, what the average worker might be earning here. And yes, that is a problem. But on the other side, Philadelphia is flush with grants, homebuyer assistance programs, and a lot of other programs that are trying to encourage homeownership, right? So they understand that there are people out there who may not have that top income, who can go right to the bank and qualify for these things. So there are other resources. And like I said, I was just talking to somebody 2 days ago about this, who, when she moved here and she saw the prices of homes compared to where she was living before in Miami, she couldn't believe it. Right. So she bought something and said, okay, well, let me hold this down, lock it down for at least 5 years. If I have to, move, I can at least rent it out and still be able to cover my mortgage costs, because that's the reality of what we're looking at here in Philadelphia. Right now, of course, depending on the parts of the city you're looking at, that's definitely going to range. But for the most part, you can find something that's feasible. And like I said, when you're comparing it to other places in the country, they don't even have an option. Right. You're pretty much stuck to rent, or you better hope for that next pay raise that's going to get you over that $120,000 income mark. Or you better start looking around the country and saying, okay, well, what other options are there for me? Or let me just get comfortable renting. Because like I said, that's the reality for most of the country. And when we go up to the national level, there's not much conversation right now happening as far as the housing affordability solutions, right? I know there was a lot of talk during the presidential election, because there's always promises then when they said, oh, we're going to give first-time home buyers this grant, or we're going to come in and cut interest rates down to this. Like I said back then, a lot of this stuff is just talk until it's actually time to do it, right? Because it's not easy. We know a lot of this has to do with political back and forth. There has to go through a lot of approvals. There have to be a lot of studies that go into these things to say, okay, what is the best solution to move forward? Just the other day, Governor Shapiro was calling for $10 million for first-time homebuyer assistance because he wants to encourage homeownership. And he realizes, once again, there's not a solution that seems to be coming from the top down to deal with the issues that we're seeing now today. Now, another thing I was looking at also was this analysis that came out from the National Home Builders, right? Where they basically saw that 75% of first-time homebuyers can't afford to buy a new home because they're just priced out of the market, right? When you're assuming the current interest rates, let's say, I think they assumed a 6.5% interest rate, and you're looking at the median price home, which back when this came out was about $460,000. They saw that, okay, this prices out about 100 million Americans who would be eligible to buy a home. So what do you do? That's 100 million people who can't step into homeownership. Think about what that does if people are able to start buying homes, start being able to expand their family, build families, and really plant roots. It changes over the cities that they're buying in, it changes over the states, and things continue to progress forward. But I'm a big believer in that if people don't have that type of ownership over anything, then your life really is kind of up and down, and you have to go with the flow of what somebody else determines, right? Your landlord might say, hey, listen, I know you've been renting here for the last 5 years, but we're about to increase the rent by about $500 or $600. What are you going to do? That's a real situation that happened to me, right? And I had to move. A lot of people around the country face those types of decisions every single week, every single month. And like I said, this is the reality of what goes on. And if people aren't talking about, okay, well, what solutions do we have to increase the inventory, right? To make sure that we are building homes in an affordable way so that first-time home buyers and second-time home buyers can also go out there and buy these homes without having to compete with everybody else, then there is no solution coming, right? And that's basically the thing that I keep coming back to every time I read these reports, where I'm just like, these numbers just keep going up and up. And when I look at the people who have the power to actually go ahead and make any change, and do anything, what are they doing, right? That's the question I'm asking. I'm just like, what are they doing? So that's why I said, when I look at Philadelphia, I know there are home programs. I know there's grants out there. If you're looking for $10,000, $15,000 in down payment assistance, these things exist, right? And we can talk about these things. Of course, if you're looking to buy a home, feel free to reach out. I'm your guy. But for people who don't have these types of assistance, so like I was saying before, my camera just died. Yes, my camera just died and I had to go ahead and redo this part. But is there a solution for people in other parts of the country, right? On a national level? Is there any assistance coming in? Do they have any real options? Or are they just stuck sitting and saving, hoping that one day home prices come down so that they can finally go ahead and buy one? Now, there was news that came out yesterday from the head of the FHFA, where he basically instructed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to figure out a way to start considering crypto assets for mortgage loans. Now, if you don't know, before you weren't able to use your Bitcoin holdings, your ETH, or whatever it is that you're holding on to, you weren't able to consider that for a home loan, right? They're only looking at what's in your savings account, what's in your check-ins. Maybe you got an investment portfolio with some stocks. Those are things they considered. But crypto assets, those were never considered, right? They looked at that as funny money. So if you did have it, you would have had to liquidate that, sell off those assets, and then move it into, your checking account, your savings account, let that sit before they consider it. Because before, and like it still is, we know the crypto market is very volatile. And that's also something that they're going to be considering too, right? If they, when they get this whole framework together, they're going to look at it. Okay, what type of assets do you hold? How volatile is it in the market, right? Is it something that drops 50% every month? Or is it something that seems to continue to go up and up and up and has been holding steady over the last year? AKA kind of like, Bitcoin. But like I say, do your own research, whatever that is that you may be into, because like I said, the things are changing and there might be some solutions that come a little bit sooner than we expected. Because if it's not going to be from the interest rate side, then it's going to have to be from some sort of assistance for home buyers, or something that spurs building in the country to get inventory up so it can reduce home prices across the board. But if we don't get any changes on those either ends, then like I said, we're going to be stuck here scratching our heads for a very long time, reading the news and waiting to see what we can actually do. So until something changes, stay tuned, stay curious, and until next time, enjoy your first sip.